Welcome back, guys, to the Defected and Stage True Sounds workshop in Johannesburg. And my name is LSG, for those who don't know, Mr. Bread for Soul. And I'm sitting next to the legendary Simone Dunmore. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah, bro.
Thank you.
Welcome. I don't even know where to begin because Defected has been such a soundtrack, if I may say, for so many lives, over the years. And recently, you guys have just appointed a new CEO, I believe, and we'll chat more about that. But I just want to quickly get a glance through of your feeling and thoughts of your journey, over the past 23 years with Defected. What have you been most proud of?
Wow. I think the most obvious thing to say about being proud is to have longevity in the music industry. To run a record label through some pretty turbulent times in the music industry, not only in terms of the way that music is consumed or, musical genres and trends, etc. So to run a label for 23 years, I think is something that I don't think about too often. But when I do stop, because I rarely stop, always thinking about the future. But when I do have this moment where I allow myself to think about my journey, I kind of smile to myself a little bit. I allow myself that, and then I get back into right. What's happening? Where do we need to go? What are the musical trends? What artists do I want to work with? Who are the artists I need to look after? Alan touched on some points about the artists that work with you and that are driven. They're the best artists. And then the artists that expect you to do everything for them, sometimes that's a little bit more difficult. So, but I'm always thinking about what I'm going to be doing in 6 months' time, 5 years' time.
Yeah.
So always moving forwards.
And if we take it back a bit, or not a bit, exactly like over 23 years ago, one of the most important things for me when I look at labels, and especially the successful ones, is really the thing of how good the A&R is at the label. I see it as like the backbone of the label, because without the music, without the new music, the label really doesn't sustain. But you were doing A&R even before Defected, before you started the label. And I'm keen to really find out from you, when and how did you realize your passion for discovering tunes?
I think that my journey is probably similar to everybody that's sitting here. Everyone goes on a discovery path of being introduced to music that they love, and then they go digging, and then it takes them somewhere else. So at a very young age, I used to collect records. I mean, it wasn't, when I was 10 years old, glam rock was big in the UK. So I had a passion for glam rock, which it sounds terrible now, but I was 10 and my tastes were forming. But it was my introduction to being passionate about music and understanding the journey that artists and the collectability of artists, and you supporting an artist, whether that be buying all their music or going to see them in concert. It was obviously very cumbersome in the early 70s. It's obviously a much more fluid experience now because it's done via social media and the artists are really visible. But, I would buy magazines and I would have my posters on the wall like any teenager would. And then, I think actually if I recognise my journey, I started A&R before I started at a record label. So I think that I would go out and I would find music. I would go home, I would make cassette compilations of the music that I bought or music that I'd heard, and then I'd give it to my friends. And then they would copy it and they would give it to their friends, and then they would copy it and give it to their friends. And that's how you create a community. And I'm talking about when I'm 20 years old. And then out of the blue, somebody asked me to DJ at their birthday party. I got no idea. I should thank a girl called Sharon Hopkins, who is just, somebody I knew back in the early 80s who asked me to play at her birthday party, because that was the trigger for me to go, fuck, I love DJing. I love being there and playing my music to an audience and sharing my taste. So sharing my taste, whether it be giving them a cassette or standing behind a deck of DJing or working behind a counter in a record store, is A&R. That is, I love this record, you need to listen to it. I love this record, you need to buy it. And then if your taste is in tune with the people on the other end of the conversation, they begin to trust you, and then you create a following, which is exactly what Alan has done with Stay True Sounds. He's identified a musical genre and a scene and a culture that he loves, and he shouts about it loud. Me and Alan have had many conversations, and he reminds me, and I've told him this, he reminds me of my younger self when I was in my early 40s. And that's not me being arrogant, I just think that's me paying him a big compliment. So,
yeah, amazing guy. A shout out to Alan. At what stage, though, like once starting, actually before I get to that, because Defected was started on the 1st of January 1999. That's the date that Google says. And I'm keen to find out what had happened the year before for you to finally get to that point where almost like a New Year's resolution, this is my thing, and 23 years later, we're still here.
It's a very simple story, actually. I mean, I had the benefit of working, and that's why I say that people's journeys are always very similar. So I worked at EMI Records, a label called Cool Tempo, and it was a credible dance record label in the early 90s. I then was head of A&R, or head of AMPM Records, which was a very successful dance label owned by Polygram. And we did Janet Jackson records, we signed Alternate 3, Moose T. Horny, Alcatraz, Give Me Love, some very seminal records within the house music scene. But what happened was Polygram, who owned A&M, got bought by Universal. And as what happens in a lot of acquisitions, there's consolidation. So Universal decided that A&M Records would merge with Island Records. And a lot of people I worked with got made redundant, they lost their jobs. Some people got to keep their jobs. I got offered a position, but the culture of the label that I worked at was changing at that point. So I decided that if you work for a company and you're not in control of your own destiny, anything can happen. Even if you're successful, anything can happen. You know, a new managing director may come in, a new head of marketing. You may not like them. They may not like you. They may have their own guy. You may get moved on through no fault of your own. So I felt that I'd accrued enough information and knowledge within the music industry to start my own label. And I had a contract. I had a contract at Polygram, which ended on the 31st of December 1998. So I couldn't start my new label until the 1st of January 1999. So the moment my contract ended, I started my new label. And that's why that date is the 1st of January, because it ended in December, my employment with Polygram Records.
Cool. Quite a perfect date to start something. And at what stage or at what point did you get some kind of evidence that this thing might become successful once you had started Defected?
We had a lot of goodwill. Everybody knew the story. And everybody knew that even within a major label, I supported dance music culture. I was very fortunate to have a managing director that supported me and allowed me to indulge myself musically. And there was always a balance to what we do. And I'll come on to this with Defected as well. There's a balance to what we do. So at a major label, you need to have success. It's about numbers. They're not bothered about being cool. They're not bothered about credibility. They're not bothered about culture. They're bothered about profitability, market share, the bottom line. So I had to tick that box. But that didn't feed my soul. So what I needed to feed my soul was records that I loved. So I would sign records that I knew were never going to sell big numbers and whatever, but I knew that they would give us credibility within the community, with DJs, with journalists, with the people that were really important for me to be able to promote my music back in the day. And I said, you know, once you have that trust of people, they will support you. So the balance was always good. So when I announced that I was going to leave, I had some relationships that I could trust upon. One of which was Sulphuric Records. We'd signed records, Urban Blues Project, and some records that those guys had produced while I was at Polygram at AMPM. And they trusted me with a record called Soul Searcher, Can't Get Enough. That was actually our first release. And it was a top 10 pop record in the UK. It sold like 80,000 records, which was, you know, for someone's first record, we made some noise. And then we created some momentum, and we had a really amazing first year. But what happens when you're running a business and you're independent, you focus on doing the good stuff. You focus on doing the things that you enjoy doing. And sometimes administration and obligations get left behind because they're just not visible for you. So, you know, like doing accounts, we have to in the UK, you have to do tax returns. You have to file your end of year accounts to Companies House. It has to be visible. I never did any of that shit. I just wanted to sign records and put them out.
For how long did you not do it?
For about 18 months, 2 years, and then and then all of a sudden I was getting letters through. You know, you're defaulting. You need to do so. We're going to come and close your company down. And what I realised was I knew how to run a record label, but I didn't know how to run a business. I had to learn very quickly how to run a business, and I'm still learning. You know, 23 years on. 30 years in the music industry, I'm still having to learn new ways of promoting records. I mean, you know, I've talked about it almost relentlessly for the last 6 months. I'm not a TikTok guy. I just don't understand it. Someone my age finds it really difficult. It's too fast moving. It just, you know, I like my songs to be journeys. I like them to be 5 minutes. I like to have an intro, a breakdown, a bridge, a chorus, for the lyrics to tell me something, for music to happen. Not for someone to speed up my record and do a silly dance and it be a viral gimmick for 30 seconds. I just can't relate to that. But I can understand how kids can relate to it. And that's partly why Defected has a new CEO, because I just don't want to be that old guy being grumpy about the way the music scene is at the moment. I've had 30 years of amazing times and memories, and I just want to keep it that way.
And because you mentioned the new CEO, are you still, you know, involved on the label?
I'm involved in as much as they want me to be involved. It's their vision now. They're going to take it on their journey. I am there. You know, when you have investors and new people come into the business, there's a slight change in the dynamic of expectation within the label. I think that most labels operate best when they're doing things for the culture, when they're doing things that are true to their hearts and their beliefs and whatever. And I think that's what resonates with people. And when we got love on social media, it's because people recognize that we, you know, that at the end of the day, we're still music fans. The things that don't sit so well with the community is the commercial things that we do. But we have to do the commercial things because we employ 50 people. We have obligations to pay their salaries at the end of every month. And that gives you a pressure that some people don't realise that you have to deal with in your life. You know, I have expectations from artists. They expect me to pay them their royalties. They expect me to count them on time. We have to have an administrative staff as well as much as we have a promotional staff. So running a business is something that's not to be underestimated. And the quid pro quo is the big commercial records allow us to pay the staff, allow us to pay our artists, and allow us to indulge ourselves with music that we really love. And, you know, I probably focus on the records that I really love because they're the ones that make me smile when I listen to them. And the records that maybe I don't relate to so personally but pay the bills are equally as important. And you know, when people come for me on social media because we released this record or we released that record and whatever, you know, I just have to just in my head reconcile to the fact that for 23 years we've supported dance music. I'm not here to make other people happy. I'm not here to justify myself to, as Alan said, a keyboard warrior on the other end. I'm here to justify myself to my staff, to my artists, and the people that really, truly understand what we're trying to achieve as a label.
And as labels grow and the hits become bigger and more bigger artists are on the label, I mean, you've always kind of had big artists and producers releasing on Defected, but I'm interested to find out, how did you avoid not losing authenticity? You know, I mean, you spoke a bit about it now, but like the kind of authenticity that you've always had as an A&R person, the balance, was there points that you had to take certain decisions that would enable the company to go, but without losing your authenticity?
I think that last week Defected posted a campaign on Instagram which got insane reaction and numbers, and it was all about the classics. It was about a record like Kings of Tomorrow featuring April, Fall For You, which is an amazing soulful house track. It never got played on radio. It was never top 10 in Beatport. It was before streaming times, etc. But that record is still important to people. You know, whatever their experiences were listening to that record, whether it was dancing with a partner or having a great time with their friends, it still resonates with people. And I think that the common denominator for the records that give us authenticity is soul. I love my soul music. I grew up listening to soul music. I grew up listening to Bobby Womack and Aretha Franklin and Gene Khan and Teddy Pendergrass and, you know, Harold Melvin, the Philly sound, the South Soul sound. And I still love that in my music. And they're the records that have longevity, because soul, it just hits something in people and it just stays there, whether it be on the dance floor, etc. And for me, if I'm to be critical of the scene today, there's just not enough soul in dance music. Dance music needs more soul. Or certainly there is soul in dance music, because Alan makes his a point of making his life's work to promote soul. But I'm talking on big dance floors. I'm talking at big festivals. You guys are fortunate in South Africa because you have a soulful scene and it resonates. But once you get into Europe, those records definitely become more and more difficult to play and get a reaction. And DJs, they go where the action is. They want big Instagram moments. They want big TikTok moments. So they're playing the obvious records. They're not taking the chances that they used to do, because the dynamic of the way the world and the way the world sees them has changed completely.
And you know, it's funny that I was laughing when you were mentioning the April song, Fall For You, because it was a massive record here playing on mainstream radio. And which brings me to my question, when did you start to realize that South Africa was big on house music?
It's grown, eh? I mean, when I first started, it was you know, Masters at Work would be putting out some records where, you know, I think Louis Vega would come here, he'd recognise some local talent, they would sign them to Masters at Work records. And then you just became curious, and then you'd find out. What freaked me out, actually, when I first started looking into South African house scene, was you pitched everything down. So we would have records that were probably at 122, 123 ppm on vinyl, and you guys were playing them at 112. You know, Fish Go Deep, The Cure and The Cause, and Dennis Ferrer, How Could I Let You Go, and whatever. You guys were recognising our music, but you were experiencing it in a different way. Again, Alan touched on it earlier. So I think when people came over, you know, here, and, you know, there was, you know, Gregory Records and Julian Jabra records, and these records were really big. Osun Ladi records were big here. So that made us curious, etc. But then you guys, we began to identify the music was being produced here, I think, like early Black Coffee records, You Turn Me On, etc., started to find their way into Europe, and that's now, I think that there's an equal exchange happening, which I think is really healthy. I've got my Sondela crew here. I've got Seth, Kitty's producing records, my son Louis, whatever. They love what is coming out of Africa, the producers, and they're trying to take that and introduce it to the European scene. And it's going to be a slow journey, but you have to start, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes you have to start at ground zero and just grow, be consistent. Show people your passion, shout about your passion, shout about it. The Twitter is a big thing. Do your charts, mention records that you have no skin in the game. Just because you love that record doesn't need to be on your label, doesn't need to be a producer that you work with. Just show people that you care about the scene and the culture, and then people will start to believe in you and trust in you.
Yeah, and because you mentioned Sondela, and so many other labels have been signed by Defected over the years, keen to find out, what does that mother label and sub-label relationship look like? What does it do for both parties?
It brings balance. I think, it's like, whatever the scene, whether it be classic music, which is slightly left and probably a little bit more experimental in its house, whether it's Melvo's Remedy project, which is probably a little bit more deeper and a little bit more musically. Sometimes those records are going to find it hard to sit on Defected. So we need to create lanes for that music to live in, because people follow labels and they follow sounds, and they when they listen to a record on a label, they don't want to waste their time. They once they trust in a label, they'll listen to it, and then if the label is very consistent, they'll support it, even if they think, maybe I don't quite relate to this record, but I trust this label, so I'm going to go with it. Getting people's trust is hard earned and easily lost. So that just means that you have to work really, really hard to retain it. So we have specific lanes. Glitterbox is more disco orientated. Classic, as I said, Honey Dijon maybe a little bit more left and a little bit more discern. Discern is probably not the quite word. Experimental, just a little bit more. It takes a few more chances. Sondela is definitely our Afro house lane. D for Dance is our more commercial lane. I mean, I don't really want to compromise. The guy that runs D for Dance probably hates me for saying this, but I don't want to compromise Defected's credibility by putting out too many commercial records. But we understand there's an audience for that, so we put those records on D for Dance. And it's just about balance.
Yeah, but that relationship, I can understand it from what you're saying, what it does for Defected as a label, as a mother label, to be able to put out these different types of lanes without being without them being a Defected record, but they are under a sub label. But what do these relationships do for the sub label? Like, is it a support point of view where Defected comes in, and or is it just an acquisition? How does that work, especially on the benefit of the sub label?
It's very similar to the narrative that Alan explained with an artist. I think that once a label has a following and a community, etc., it's easy to have some synergy with Defected. Defected can help elevate people. It can slingshot profile. It can make things visible. But that only takes you so far, really and truly. Like the artist that needs to promote its own music and get its own following, and then work in tandem with the label. The sub-label needs to have consistency, create its own community, get its own following, and work in tandem with Defected. And then when we do something like Defected Croatia, where it's a 5 or 6 day festival with 4 and 5 stages. We can host a Sondela stage, we can host a classic stage, we can host a glitterbox stage, and people understand the musical experience that they're going to get, and they program their day according to who they want to listen to. It might start daytime. You know, Alan curated a Stay True Sound stage there last year, which was our introduction to Alan and Stay True Sounds. It worked really, really well. He's going to come back next year. We're talking about the artists that we want to book. And that's a similar journey. Sondela, when it started 2 or 3 years ago, people didn't really know it or understand it. This year, it just rocked the beach stage. So initially, it did a smaller stage, and now it's growing in its popularity and people understanding it. And that's the relationship. We understand that dance music is really broad. The sounds are vast, and we can't channel them all through Defected. It would be too confusing. It would be too much. So it's our way of acknowledging the great music that is being produced globally, and making it easily understandable and consumed easily consumed by the punter at the other end of the experience.
Yeah, if I may take it back a bit, because obviously the label does well, and I'm sure that there are certain moments where the label isn't doing well, and you might have to take certain decisions. And if I may read a quote from your interview with DJMag.com, and it reads, I quote, "If it wasn't for Bob Sinclair, Defected would not be in business anymore, and that's the truth," unquote. Can you give us some insight over the line?
Yeah, I mean, running a business is really difficult, and sometimes you're subject to market forces that are beyond your control. So in the instance of Bob Sinclair, we had a business. It was selling vinyl, CDs and cassettes. Our business was completely founded on that was the way that we would ship those records to a store, and people would go into a store, they would buy those records, the money would come back to us, and it would finance the business. And then people started to file share, Napster, MP3s. We weren't set up to deal with that. And it adversely affected our business to the point that we had a massive cash flow problem. And we were probably on the verge of going out of business. And then we signed Love Generation, which was a hit all across Europe. Bob Sinclair trusted us with that record. We put it out, we delivered it for him. It was a top 10 record in the UK. It was a hit all over Europe. And that income allowed us to start again and navigate our way through the transition through being a traditional label selling vinyl, CDs and cassettes, to actually then Apple Music started. We were then able to monetize our music via downloads, and we went again. And also I think that sometimes during life, I'm a great believer in karma. Whenever we've needed that little bit of luck, and it's been really dark, I'd go home and I'd sit on the sofa and I'd find it really hard to talk to my wife and my family because there's a lot of weight on your shoulders in terms of responsibility. Something happens in a positive way and it's enabled us to get through dark times. And then I think, once you start again several times, you learn to understand something is on the horizon, it's going to make life difficult, and you prepare yourself for it. You can read the signs. I've read quite a lot of business books. There's a book called The Art of War, and it's written by a Japanese general 10 centuries ago. And it's all about modern warfare and how you apply it within the marketplace. So if your enemy is really strong, you don't attack them. If you've got nothing to say, you don't shout about it. If you wait about it till you've got something really positive to say that's going to have a really big impact before you go and say, we've got this record coming, etc. So you just have to look at the market forces, the way the world is and whatever, and you cut your cloth accordingly. So when EDM was popular and house music took a real battering, no one was interested in house. It was all about EDM. And even if they were interested in house, the Swedish House Mafia, who had house in their name, that's what people thought house music was. So I'd go to a gig and I would be playing, and someone would come and say, "Can you play some house music?" And I'm like, "I'm playing house music." No, play the Swedish House Mafia. And they were challenging times. And what I realised was we could not compete. So we battened down the hatches. We really consolidated. We consolidated our costs because we know that musical taste is cyclical. It would come back round. We needed to be there, ready and waiting for people when it came back round. People got jaded with EDM. They came back to house music. We were there waiting for them, and that's when we shouted. We put our flag in the ground and said, "We're here." And again, because we stayed true to ourselves through a tough time, people trusted us. And that cycle has happened several times through 23 years.
And are you kind of almost sure that it always comes back? Because I'm asking this question, how many people here, just by show of hands, are amapiano producers or artists? And how many of you guys do deep Afro soulful? Almost everyone. And amapiano is really big, right, in South Africa, and I'm sure globally it's getting there too. But there had been a sense for quite some time that house music doesn't receive the same love it used to receive, or the same support it used to receive, especially from mainstream radio. But you go to the gigs, the love is still there. Are you almost sure that the cycles always come back?
Absolutely 100% positive. So what you have is mainstream culture. Mainstream culture is where everybody lives. And when there is a mainstream culture, counterculture starts to grow, because there are a lot of people that aren't happy with the mainstream and they want to do things a little bit differently. And they're disenfranchised with the music that they're getting fed, or the events that, the lineups that people are curating and whatever. So they go and find an alternative. And that's when the scene starts to grow again. And then when the mainstream gets jaded because they're fed up being fed the same thing all of the time and things aren't quite so excited, they go looking for an alternative, and the counterculture and the scene is there waiting for them. And that cycle has happened with disco 5 or 6 times since, disco was popular in the early 70s, then it became cheap. Is it load shedding? Oh no, we're back. So, and then it became cheesy, then it went underground, it then reinvented itself, etc. And then over the last 2-3 years, disco's been extremely popular in Europe, in America. And all the records that people said were cheesy, all of a sudden became palatable again, because it was countering the mainstream culture that was happening. The house scene got very dark and serious and very minimal. And the alternative to that was disco records, which are really up and happy and flamboyant, etc. And so I've experienced this numerous times. So TikTok culture and promoting records on TikTok is where it's at the moment. I mean, on Instagram, I follow a thing where, someone will go into a marketing meeting at a major label and go, right, we've brought onto the Rufus Du Sol tour, we're doing Coachella, we've got some TV programs, this act's going to be massive. And the other guy at the other end of the desk goes, yeah, but how many followers they got on TikTok? He goes, well, we haven't got a TikTok game yet, but we're working on it. He goes, I'm not interested. And, that is the way that the world is going. Radio has less influence in the UK than TikTok. TikTok breaks records in the UK, not radio. But it will change, because people will get tired and jaded of the novelty factor and the gimmick factor of TikTok, and they'll want to be a little bit more serious. And then it will come back, not just my way, but your way as well. So I feel like a broken record, because it's all I've been talking about for about 6 months. So.
And besides being able to kind of stand your ground, Defected has also been able to rebrand in some way, and to kind of still be relevant. I mean, your social media is popping, and it's been for some time. What are some of the aspects that kind of enabled you to do that? Was it getting new and younger team members as you working a lot with your son? Yeah, has that been the case of including new, fresh talent, bringing them into the label?
100%. We employ really young staff. 3 weeks ago, I celebrated my 60th birthday. I can't experience music like a 20-year-old can. So what I have to do is I have to employ, or I don't have to now because it's not my business, but we employed younger people and we would listen to them, their experiences, the acts that they would go and see, the music that was important to them and whatever. And we would take that information and we would try and work it into our activities, whether that be music that we sign, DJs that we book, the way that we promote our music on Instagram. But I think the growth of our social media was not down to the fact that we promoted records that we were releasing. It's the fact that we would shout about an artist that we love, even if it's on somebody else's label. Those records would get great engagement because we're not promoting then, we're sharing. People on the other end of a social media post know when you're promoting, when you're marketing, and they know that you're advertising to them, but they appreciate it when you're sharing something. So the likes on something that we share are far greater than the likes on something that we're promoting. And that's what I mean about promoting the culture. And you know, talking about someone who's an amazing dancer, or someone that's done an amazing record, or you know, an event that's going crazy. You know, Fred again recently did a Boiler Room which got incredible engagement. He signed to Warner Brothers, but we thought that our community would be interested in that clip, so we posted about it. And I think again that just brings trust. Ultimately, we have to promote our records as well, so that is part of the game. But promoting the culture is more important to me than promoting the music that we're releasing. As a DJ, I don't just play records that I'm signing. I play records that I love. I want to shout about a record by the Martinez Brothers or Louis Vega or Osunlade, because that gives my set a greater diversity and greater credibility. If I'm just going to play records that are released on Defected, everyone knows what they're going to get. There's no surprises. And once you become predictable, people move away. People need to have curveballs. It keeps them coming back to you.
And because because Defected has a lot of events that they do, and strong events. You mentioned Defected Croatia, the stuff that you do in London. Would we ever see a Defected festival of some sort specifically for South Africa?
I think a festival may be a difficult proposition, but I definitely believe we could do a stage and we could curate stages. I think that the thing about the events, they're our marketing. They're the realness about what we do. You know, we release a record, we book the producer, we book the vocalist. They perform in front of an audience that we've created for them. The reaction is always, the sum is greater than the parts, because we've put the right people in front of the right DJ. The reaction is amazing. We film it, we put it on our social media, and it's great promotion. And in the same way as Alan said, the first record that they put out, they did an event. The synergy between events, you know, it's a realness. You can shout about a record being amazing, but if there's no reaction, people find it really difficult to relate to. But if they see 500 people with their hands in the air, or someone in the audience singing it, you know, people being lost in music, etc., people relate to that shit because that's where they want to be. Music's all about escapism. You know, everybody here has, you know, challenges in life, places that they need to be, places that they want to get to, aspirations, and it puts pressure on them. And music allows you to escape from that. You know, the thing about Lost in Music, and even going back as far as Saturday Night Fever, which is in the 70s, someone working really hard, going out, buying an outfit, knowing that they want to look amazing on the dance floor, knowing that the record that they want to hear, that record coming on, them punching the air and then forgetting about all the shit they have to deal with in front of them or behind them. is what music brings into people's lives, and that's why it's so important to people.
Before I ask my last question, I've been meaning to ask this, but did you name your son after Louis Vega?
No. But if I was to name him after someone, Louis would definitely be pretty high on my list.
He's the perfect name.
Yeah, it's. I don't know why we came to that name actually. And I called my other son's called Lucas, so we obviously like the phonetic Lou in some way. It gets a little bit confusing in the house, but Louis Vega is a role model for every single person in this music industry. Absolutely at the top of his game. Never stops making music, never stops DJ. He can play salsa, hip hop, disco, Afro house, techno, house, classics, etc. I have never known. He's from another universe, that guy, and he doesn't have an off button. And I rarely speak so highly about an artist, but if every artist in the world had the work ethic of Louis Vega, the world would be a much, much better place. And maybe subliminally, I did name my son after Louis Vega, but it's something I could never probably admit publicly. So.
Oh, cool one. And just my final question, which is something that I would try to give, to use as a gift to anybody who might want to start their own label, anybody who's got those kind of aspirations. Knowing what you know and your experience in the industry, if you were to kind of start over again in 2022 without having any networks or kind of community that you've built over the years, and you had 3 kind of tenets that you could give to someone, a young person, that they could take upon themselves to hopefully become a successful label owner, what are those 3 things that you could give?
Be honest with people. Always be honest with people, because ultimately the truth always comes out. And, sometimes you have to have difficult conversations with people, and people don't necessarily want to hear what you have to say. But you just have to be honest with them. And those, you have to grow into feeling comfortable about having those conversations. Be humble. You never know who you're speaking to. I speak to people and and then I cyber stalk them and go on the internet, whatever it is, look at their Instagram followings and whatever, and go, wow, I never realised they did this and whatever. But if you come off as arrogant when you have that first meeting, sometimes that first impression sticks. So always try and be humble. And also you meet people and they go on to be great things, and you want them to think good of you and hopefully work with you in the future. And then, so be honest, be humble, and stay true to yourself. So, I've had numerous conversations with producers in the last 6 or 7 months where they go, I don't get the TikTok thing. I can't bring myself to do that selfish, promotion. It doesn't sit comfortably with me. And I just like, you just got to be true to yourself. Because if you have 5 fans around the world, at least that's 5 people that care about you, which is more than what a lot of people have. If you have 500, 5,000 and whatever, but if you fulfill the expectations of those 5 people, they'll tell their friends, and then their friends will tell their friends, and that's how you grow a following. But you don't grow a following by chasing what's happening out there. You grow a following by being true to yourself, by being authentic, and by people trusting and believing you. So just stay true to yourself. So the 3 things: stay true to yourself, be humble, be honest.
I just want to say, firstly, thank you, for taking this time, but more so for giving your life to house music. I feel like, and I know that your contributions have impacted many people that are here, and I'm sure many people across the world. And I don't know if you came up with this, but somebody said house music all life long. Let's give it up for Simone Dunmore.
Thank you. Thank you.